More than 45 years have passed since Diff'rent Strokes first landed on American screens, and the people behind it went on to live lives filled with triumph, heartbreak, addiction, crime, and endings that nobody watching that cheerful sitcom could have imagined. One of them robbed a Las Vegas video store at gunpoint, and the flabbergasted clerk called 911 to report that she'd just been held up by the girl from the show. Another spent decades battling a disease that had been slowly taking him apart since childhood, was robbed of nearly $18 million by the people he trusted most, and died at 42, having never once stopped fighting. A third walked away from the cameras as one of the youngest members of the most famous musical family in the world, and went on to become one of the best-selling recording artists in history. And one of them, the man at the center of it all, watched his television children fall apart one by one and carried that grief with him quietly to the end. She wasn't supposed to stay long. Charlotte Rae joined Diff'rent Strokes as housekeeper Edna Garrett for just the first 2 seasons, a warm, decisive, unflappable maternal force in the Drummond household. And her plan was always to return to the stage if the spin-off didn't work. The spin-off worked. She was 52 years old when Diff'rent Strokes premiered on November 3, 1978. Behind her lay a career on Broadway that had been building for 30 years. Charlotte Rae Lubotsky was born on April 22, 1926, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the daughter of Jewish immigrants from Russia. The family was not wealthy, but it was culturally rich. Her parents believed in education, in music, and in the possibility that America had something extraordinary to offer. Charlotte headed to New York in 1948 after briefly attending Northwestern University, and Broadway found her almost immediately. She received 2 Tony Award nominations over the following decades, one in 1966 for Best Featured Actress in a Musical for Pickwick, and another in 1969 for Best Actress in a Play for Morning, Noon, and Night. She recorded an album. She appeared in television dramas. She played Mammy Yoakum in Lil Abner and Mrs. Peachum in a celebrated 1954 revival of the Threepenny Opera. And she did both before she was 30 years old, inhabiting roles that seemed to have aged decades ahead of her actual life. What many viewers never knew was that Charlotte Rae herself had proposed the spin-off idea to the producers of Diff'rent Strokes. She saw an opportunity to build something larger out of Mrs. Garrett, and she was right. Before the spin-off launched, she was also briefly contractually tied to return to Diff'rent Strokes if The Facts of Life flopped, a clause that the show's extraordinary success quickly made irrelevant. She also had a small but memorable role in Woody Allen's Bananas in 1971 as the mother of Allen's character, a film that almost no one associates with her today. Her personal life carried genuine weight. She married composer John Strauss in 1951 and had 2 sons with him. But after 25 years together, Strauss told her he was bisexual and wanted an open relationship. They divorced. She never remarried. One of her sons, Andy, was discovered to be autistic at 16, was at one point held at a juvenile psychiatric ward in New York, and died of a heart attack in his 40s. Charlotte said publicly that there was nothing more devastating in her life than his illness and early death. She carried that quietly, without complaint. She had a pacemaker implanted in 1982, while simultaneously filming both Diff'rent Strokes and The Facts of Life, and continued working without slowing down. When The Facts of Life launched in 1979, Charlotte Rae became its anchor, the irreplaceable Mrs. Garrett, house mother at Eastland Boarding School, for 7 seasons. The Emmy nomination followed in 1982. In later years, she appeared in Ricky and the Flash in 2015, opposite Meryl Streep at the age of 89, her final screen performance. In April 2017, she was diagnosed with bone cancer. On August 5, 2018, Charlotte Rae died at her home in Los Angeles, surrounded by her family. She was 92 years old. Todd Bridges, who had loved her like a second mother, wrote, "Diff'rent Strokes would not have been the same without you. My heart is full of pain." A woman who had outlasted every difficulty that life had offered her, and done it with warmth, style, and an absolute refusal to disappear. She came to the show in its 3rd season as the second housekeeper, Adelaide Brubaker, crotchety, sharp-tongued, and genuinely funny. Nedra Volz was 70 years old when she first appeared on Diff'rent Strokes. She had been acting professionally for years at that point, and she brought to Adelaide the kind of lived-in authority that cannot be faked. Nedra Viola Gordonier was born on June 18, 1908, in Montrose, Iowa, and her career began before she could even read. Her parents were vaudeville performers, and she made her stage debut at age 2, billed as Baby Nedra in the family tent show. The act toured the Midwest, and she continued performing it until she was 11 and had simply outgrown the billing. In the early 1930s, she became a featured vocalist with Cato's Vagabonds, a Des Moines big band that briefly enjoyed national popularity. She appeared on exactly 178 RPM recording with Will Osborne's orchestra in 1933. She then stepped away from the spotlight entirely, married, raised 3 children, and did not return to professional acting until she was in her mid-60s. Her first television appearance was in Good Times in 1975, when she was already 66 years old. What followed was one of the most improbable late career runs in the history of American television. She appeared in Diff'rent Strokes for 22 episodes between 1980 and 1984. During that exact same period, she was simultaneously playing Ms. Emma Tisdale, the feisty postmistress of Hazard County, in 13 episodes of The Dukes of Hazzard, and Winona Mother B. Beck, the sharp-tongued matriarch, in 15 episodes of Filthy Rich. She was, at one point, appearing in 3 separate primetime network series simultaneously, at the age of 72. She played guest roles on Alice, Maude, Night Court, The Comish, and Coach. She appeared in Lust in the Dust, Moving Violations, and Earth Girls Are Easy. In Moving Violations, director Neil Israel let her perform her own stunts, including being lifted into a window and dropped headfirst onto the floor. In her final film appearance, The Great White Hype in 1996, she was credited simply as Old Lady. She was 87 years old. On January 20th, 2003, Nedra Volz died of complications from Alzheimer's disease in Mesa, Arizona. She was 94. She had been performing since before World War I, had outlasted virtually every style and format of American entertainment, and in her final decade had become one of the most recognizable faces on American television, without anyone ever quite knowing her name. The third housekeeper arrived in season 5 and stayed until the show's final breath. Mary Jo Catlett played Pearl Gallagher, flustered, good-natured, magnificently overwhelmed, for the remainder of Diff'rent Strokes' run, and she arrived at the role at age 40, carrying a stage resume that had been building since before most of the show's viewers were born. Mary Jo Catlett was born on September 2, 1938, in Denver, Colorado. She studied at the Pasadena Playhouse in California and began her career on the stage, where she made a mark that few in her generation could match. She originated the role of Ernestina in the original 1964 Broadway production of Hello, Dolly, performing alongside Carol Channing in a show that became one of the legendary productions of its era. The original cast recording sold millions of copies. Her voice is on it. She worked extensively in musical theater, in film, and in television before landing Pearl, but it was a single animated role that made her truly immortal to the generation that grew up after the 1990s. In 1999, she was cast as Mrs. Puff, SpongeBob's perpetually terrorized driving instructor, in SpongeBob SquarePants, and has voiced that character through every subsequent season, every film, every special, for over 25 consecutive years. What is not widely known is that Mary Jo Catlett also studied at the American Conservatory Theater and appeared in the original Broadway cast of Applause in 1970, and in the original West Side Story revival. She is one of the very few performers alive today who can claim both an original Hello, Dolly credit and an unbroken SpongeBob run, a range of professional longevity that has no real parallel in American entertainment history. Today, in 2026, Mary Jo Catlett is 87 years old and still working. The woman who started on a Broadway stage 60 years ago is still showing up, still making people laugh, still voicing the most hapless driving teacher in the history of American animation. She was 13 years old when she stepped onto the set of Diff'rent Strokes for the first time. She was 34 when she died. In between lay a story of early triumph, industry cruelty, desperate choices, and a final chapter so bleak that those who loved her still struggle to speak about it without their voices breaking. Dana Michelle Strain was born on November 7, 1964, in Maywood, California. She was given up for adoption as an infant by her 16-year-old birth mother and raised in the San Fernando Valley by her adoptive parents, who began taking her to casting calls when she was still too young to understand what they were. She landed over 100 television commercials as a child. What almost nobody knew until years later was that Dana had actually been the producer's first choice to play the lead role in The Exorcist, a role her adoptive mother refused to allow her to take. She also appeared on The Gong Show as a child, which is where producer Al Burton spotted her for Diff'rent Strokes. At 13, she was offered one of the most significant choices a girl her age could be given, a spot on the U.S. Olympic figure skating team. She was genuinely competing at that level, or a starring role in a brand new NBC sitcom. She chose the sitcom, and Kimberly Drummond became her defining role, and, in ways she could not have predicted, her undoing. On the set, the young cast quickly discovered that fame had an edge. Dana, Gary, and Todd were all teenagers navigating extraordinary public exposure with almost no guidance. They began drinking and using drugs after hours. The pressure was enormous and unrelenting. Dana later admitted in interviews that she had suffered a diazepam overdose at 14, while the show was in full production and the public image of Kimberly was still perfectly intact. Despite earning $25,000 per episode at the show's height, she was frequently broke by the time it ended. When she became pregnant in 1984, the network did not stand by her. She was released from her contract. She married the baby's father, guitarist Lanny Lambert, and their son Tyler was born on July 2, 1984. A brief return to the show's final ABC season could not disguise what had already changed. The decade that followed was a long series of wrong turns. On February 28, 1991, she walked into a Las Vegas video store with a pellet gun and demanded the contents of the cash register. She made off with $164. The clerk who called 911 told the dispatcher in a voice of complete disbelief, "I've just been robbed by the girl who played Kimberly on Diff'rent Strokes." Wayne Newton posted her bail. She was given 5 years probation. The following year, she was arrested again for forging a prescription for Valium. Another 5 years of probation. Another round of rehabilitation that didn't hold. On May 7, 1999, Dana appeared on The Howard Stern Show and spoke about her life, the legal problems, the financial ruin, the desperate hope that the interview might somehow restart things. She sounded, those who listened said, more focused than she had in years. She flew with her fiancé Robert Menchaca to Oklahoma to visit his family for the weekend. The next morning, on May 8, 1999, she was found in her Winnebago, unconscious. She had taken a combination of prescription painkillers and muscle relaxants. She never woke up. The medical examiner ruled it a suicide. She was 34 years old. Her son Tyler, 14 at the time, was devastated. And 11 years later, on May 6, 2010, 2 days before the anniversary of his mother's death, he died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was 25. The grief traveled, as grief in families sometimes does, in a straight line across a generation. He was the calm at the center of a storm that never stopped. Philip Drummond, the widowed Park Avenue millionaire who welcomed 2 black children from Harlem into his home and his heart, was a role that required enormous steadiness. And Conrad Bain brought to it something rarer than talent, genuine human decency. He was 55 years old when the show premiered. Conrad Stafford Bain was born on February 4th, 1923, in Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada, the son of a Scottish-Canadian family. He had an identical twin brother named Bonar, and the two of them appeared together on screen in a 1977 episode of Maude, which is one of the stranger and more delightful footnotes in his biography. He grew up loving Canadian sports, speed skating, ice hockey, but somewhere in high school, the theater found him, and it did not let go. He studied at the Banff School of Fine Arts, where he met his future wife, artist Monica Sloan. Yes, World War II interrupted everything. He served in the Canadian Army, returned home, enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, married Monica in 1945, and became a naturalized American citizen in 1946. They remained married for the rest of his life, more than 60 years. Broadway and off-Broadway kept him busy for 2 decades before television claimed him. He appeared in Woody Allen's Bananas in 1971 and Sidney Lumet's The Anderson Tapes in the same year. 2 films that are rarely associated with his name today, but that demonstrate the serious dramatic range he possessed before sitcoms consumed his public image. His great pre-Strokes role was Dr. Arthur Harmon on Norman Lear's Maude, the conservative, blustering foil to B. Arthur's formidable feminist, a role he played for 6 full seasons, and that established him as one of the most skilled straight comedy performers of his generation. Lear later said that Bain had a very rare comedic spine, the ability to be simultaneously the straight man and quietly, devastatingly funny. He knew on set that the show belonged to Gary Coleman. He was generous about it. He praised Coleman and Todd Bridges publicly as natural talents without egos. But as the years passed and the off-screen stories began accumulating, Dana's pregnancy and dismissal, Todd's drug addiction, Gary's deteriorating health and financial betrayal, Bain spoke carefully and with evident pain. He loved them and could not always say the things he wanted to say. After Diff'rent Strokes ended in 1986, a remarkable coda came in 1996. In the series finale of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Conrad Bain and Gary Coleman appeared together one last time as Drummond and Arnold house hunting in Los Angeles, an image of continuity and affection that moved everyone who saw it. His last television appearance was in 2011 on Unforgettable. On January 14, 2013, Conrad Bain died of natural causes in Livermore, California, 21 days before what would have been his 90th birthday. His daughter Jennifer said he had been, in real life, very much like Philip Drummond, warm, steady, intellectual, and good. 4 feet 8 inches tall, a face that stayed childlike well into his 30s, and a quality of spontaneous, unguarded emotional intelligence in front of a camera that producers and directors across 30 years consistently said they had never encountered in anyone else. Gary Coleman was a phenomenon, and the gap between what he gave the world and what the world gave him in return is one of the most painful stories in the history of American television. He was 10 years old when the show premiered. Gary Wayne Coleman was born on February 8, 1968 in Zion, Illinois, and was adopted as an infant by W.G. Coleman, a pharmaceutical representative, and Edmonia Sue, a nurse practitioner. At birth, he was diagnosed with focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, a chronic autoimmune kidney disease that causes irreversible internal scarring. The corticosteroids used to treat it, administered throughout his childhood, permanently stunted his growth at 4 feet 8 inches and preserved his face in perpetual boyhood. He had his first kidney transplant at age 5. By 17, his body had absorbed the second transplanted organ. From December 31st, 1985 until his death, Gary Coleman lived without a single functioning kidney in his body. He required dialysis for the rest of his life. He performed entire scenes between dialysis sessions on the set of Diff'rent Strokes, and nobody watching from home had any idea. The talent was visible from the beginning. Norman Lear saw a small boy with enormous eyes and an instinct for timing that could not be taught, and built a show around him. By the height of Diff'rent Strokes, Gary Coleman was earning $100,000 per episode, one of the highest paid child actors in the history of the medium. At the peak of his fame, he received over 30,000 fan letters a week. His catchphrase, "What you talking about, Willis?" became one of the most recognized comic lines in American popular culture. 3 consecutive People's Choice Awards, named the #1 kid star in television history by VH1. A passion for model trains that he pursued throughout his entire life, building and maintaining miniature railroads across multiple states, one of which is being preserved today in Colorado Springs, Colorado. In 2003, he ran for governor of California in the recall election that brought Arnold Schwarzenegger to power, and received over 14,000 votes, finishing 8th in a field of 135 candidates. And then came the moment that defined the bitterness of his adult years. When Gary turned 17 and reached for his trust fund, he found almost nothing there. $18 million had been earned. $220,000 remained. The money had been drained by his adoptive parents who had written themselves into his contract as paid employees, and by the business managers and lawyers who had helped them. He sued. He won a settlement of $1.3 million. a fraction of what had been taken. The years after were a long search for ground that kept shifting. He worked security. He worked in hobby shops. He filed for bankruptcy in 1999. In 2007, he married Shannon Price, and the relationship became publicly volatile. In a 1993 television interview, Coleman had disclosed that he had twice attempted suicide by overdosing on pills following the court battle with his parents. In January 2010, he suffered a seizure on the set of a television program. In February, another. He had undergone heart surgery in May 2009, the details of which were never publicly disclosed. On May 26, 2010, he fell down the stairs at his home in Santaquin, Utah, struck his head, and suffered an epidural hematoma. He was admitted to Utah Valley Regional Medical Center in Provo. On May 28, 2010, Gary Coleman died. He was 42 years old. He had been living for the last 25 years of his life without any kidneys at all. He was unquestionably a superstar, Vanity Fair wrote. The kidney condition that enabled him, even as a teen, to play the world's most precocious little brother also complicated his life in ways most of us will never understand. He arrived in the show's 6th season as the newest member of the Drummond household, Sam McKinney, the red-headed, energetic stepson of Philip Drummond's new wife. And he was just 7 years old when filming began, turning 8 that November 1983. Danny Cooksey brought an unforced, crackling energy to a show that needed new momentum in its final years, and he left it as one of the most versatile child performers of his generation. Daniel Ray Allen Cooksey Jr. was born on November 2, 1975, in Moore, Oklahoma. He had been pursuing a career in country music since the age of 5. His mother had moved him to Los Angeles specifically for that purpose. He was singing country before he was in school. An agent happened to see him perform and suggested he audition for Diff'rent Strokes instead. He got the part. What followed was a 3-season run that connected him to one of the defining sitcoms of the era and to the cast members who would shape him. He developed a close bond with Dana Plato. Their birthdays fell in the same month, and he remembered her on set as perpetually happy, funny, and warm, often bringing baby Tyler along to the studio. When she died in 1999, Danny Cooksey served as one of her pallbearers. After Diff'rent Strokes, he kept moving. He played Kevin Cavanaugh in The Cavanaughs and Bobby Budnick in Nickelodeon's beloved Salute Your Shorts. In 1991, he appeared as Tim, John Connor's long-haired punk rocker best friend. In James Cameron's Terminator 2, Judgment Day, facing down the T-1000 and surviving, which is more than most characters in that film could claim. He was 16. In between acting roles, he threw himself into music. He was lead vocalist and guitarist for the heavy metal group Bad for Good, which released the album Refugee on Interscope Records in 1992, and he played in multiple bands across 2 decades. His most enduring legacy, however, has come from voice work. He became one of the most prolific voice actors of his generation, voicing Montana Max in Tiny Toon Adventures, Jack Spicer in Shaolin Showdown, Dave the title character in Dave the Barbarian, and characters in Pepper Ann, Hey Arnold, Invader Zim, Kim Possible, Static Shock, Pound Puppies, and dozens of other animated series across the 1990s and 2000s. His voice has reached generations of children who never connected it to the red-haired boy from Diff'rent Strokes. Today, in 2026, Danny Cooksey is 50 years old. He was married to makeup artist Amber Lee from 1998 until their divorce in 2019. They have 2 children together. He appears at fan conventions and on Cameo, offering personalized messages to fans. A boy who arrived on Diff'rent Strokes to play a minor character in the final stretch, and quietly outlasted almost everyone else on the cast in terms of professional continuity. She was 12 years old when Diff'rent Strokes premiered in November 1978, though she didn't join the cast herself until Season 3 in 1980 at age 14. She played Charlene Dupre, Willis Jackson's girlfriend, recurring across 4 seasons. And almost no one watching could have predicted that the quiet, pretty girl on the sitcom was about to become one of the most consequential musical figures of the 20th century, Janet Demita. Jo Jackson was born on May 16, 1966, in Gary, Indiana, the youngest of 10 children in the Jackson family. Her brothers, Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, and Michael, had already been famous for years before Janet was old enough to understand what fame meant. She grew up in its shadow, in a household shaped by her father, Joseph Jackson's absolute controlling devotion to the family's commercial success. Joseph was emotionally withdrawn and frequently harsh. Janet has spoken of addressing him solely by his first name as a child, by his own instruction. She had initially dreamed of becoming a horse racing jockey or an entertainment lawyer. Both were genuine ambitions, not the manufactured retrospective interests of publicists. Acting found her instead. She had already appeared on Good Times at 11 before Todd Bridges, who had seen her on that show and simply loved her work, pushed for her to be cast in Diff'rent Strokes. She and Bridges dated in real life during the production years. He has spoken of her with genuine warmth ever since. During her time on the show, she performed The Magic is Working, a song from her debut album in a 1982 episode, one of the stranger artifacts of that period. A future global superstar singing her debut material on a sitcom to an audience that had no idea what was coming. What producer Norman Lear said when he first met her at age 11 has often been repeated. The talent was abundant and clear. She left the show in 1984. She appeared in fame by her father's insistence rather than her own. She briefly and secretly married R&B singer James DeBarge in an annulled union. And then, at 19, she walked into a recording studio and took her career into her own hands. Control, released in 1986, was the declaration. The album's title was Not an Accident. The singles remade American popular music. Rhythm Nation. 1814 followed in 1989 and sold over 20 million copies worldwide. She became one of the most commercially successful musicians in history, one of the architects of New Jack Swing, and a defining influence on virtually every R&B and pop artist who came after her. Today, in 2026, Janet Jackson is 60 years old. She is one of the best-selling recording artists of all time, with 5 Grammy Awards, a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, and a career that has continued to evolve and surprise across 4 decades. The girl who played Willis's girlfriend on a sitcom never stopped moving. He is the last one standing. As of 2026, Todd Bridges is the only surviving member of the original Diff'rent Strokes cast, the last person alive who remembers what it felt like to be on that set, with those people, at the beginning of everything. He is 61 years old. He has been sober for decades, and the road that brought him here is one that almost didn't. Todd Anthony Bridges was born on May 27, 1965, in San Francisco, California, into a family already deep in the entertainment industry. His mother, Betty, was an actress, director, and manager. His father, James, was a talent agent. His siblings were actors. Before Diff'rent Strokes, he appeared in the landmark miniseries Roots, a credit that very few people associate with him today, but that places him in one of the most significant pieces of American television history ever made. He also had a recurring role on Fish, the Barney Miller spin-off. He was 13 years old when Diff'rent Strokes premiered and Willis Jackson entered American living rooms, the older, more street-hardened brother who was cooler than Arnold, but arguably less the show's center. On the set, he began smoking marijuana at 15. In his 20s, after the show ended and the jobs dried up, and typecast Willis Drummond followed him everywhere he went, the marijuana became crack cocaine and methamphetamine. He was arrested multiple times. In 1988, he was charged with the attempted murder of a drug dealer. An acquittal followed in November 1989. He was also arrested on a concealed weapon charge and possession of cocaine. In 1994, arrested again after allegedly ramming someone's car following an argument. The details of those years, which he described fully in his 2008 memoir, Killing Willis. From Diff'rent Strokes to the mean streets to the life I always wanted, are harrowing in the specificity of their suffering. He lost his money, he nearly lost his life, multiple times. In a 2010 appearance on the Oprah Winfrey Show, he revealed publicly for the first time that he had been sexually abused at age 11 by a publicist and family friend. He had never spoken of it before. He turned things around in the early 1990s through recovery programs and the discovery of faith. In 1998, in a moment that revealed what kind of man he had become, He and his brother James spotted a paraplegic woman named Stella Klein, whose wheelchair had rolled into a lake while she was fishing. They jumped in and saved her. She said afterward, "Everybody's been saying nothing but bad stuff about Todd Bridges on the news and in the papers. He has a heart of gold." He returned to television and found real work again. A recurring role as Monk on Everybody Hates Chris from 2007 to 2009. Years of commentary on True TV's World's Dumbest, and Celebrity Big Brother in 2022. He has 2 children. His son Spencer followed him into acting as a child, appearing in Daddy Day Camp. He speaks at events. He advocates for youth. In January 2026, he announced his separation from his wife Batijo Hershey, whom he had married in September 2022. The divorce filing followed in March. He described it as a decision made with prayer. That is the language he uses now for everything. Prayer, reflection, the long work of building something stable from the ruins of what addiction had left behind. He carries, quietly but visibly, the weight of having watched Dana go, and Gary go, and Conrad go, and Charlotte go. One by one, each departure smaller than the last audience they'd played to, while he alone remained. There it is, a show that the whole country loved, and a cast whose lives tell a story that is harder to watch than anything that ever aired on the program itself. 3 of the main child performers dead before their time. 2 of the original cast arrested on serious charges. One of them robbed of everything she had trusted other people to protect. And one woman, the housekeeper who was never supposed to stay, who outlived nearly all of them and went on to become, in a completely different show, the most beloved television mother of an entire decade. They were trying to take care of each other. That much is clear from everything that anyone who was there has ever said. Some of them managed it, some of them couldn't. The show was called Diff'rent Strokes, and what they were swimming against, all of them, in different ways, was a current that fame brings with it. Fast, unpredictable, and colder than it looks from the shore. Tell us in the comments, which of these stories surprised you most? And where in the world are you watching from? If you want to keep finding the real stories behind the classics, subscribe to this channel and ring the bell. Every week, we go past the legend and into the life.